Washington Journal continues.
Andrew Exum, this is the front page of the Wall Street Journal from yesterday. General McChrystal's remark that the Taliban is now winning. Do you agree?
Yes and no. I agree that with General McChrystal that in a counterinsurgency, if you're not winning, you're losing, and that we need to seize back momentum in Afghanistan. On the other hand, I think it's important that the American people understand that it's not like the Quetta-Shura Taliban or the Haqqani Network or any of these insurgent groups in Afghanistan are going to be able to march on Kabul successfully over the next 12 months. What we're fearing in Afghanistan, and one of the things that really worried us when we were working over there, was this campaign of fear and intimidation that's taking place in the city of especially southern Afghanistan. That's what we fear, and I think the Taliban very much is beating us in that silent war, so to speak. Not so much the kinetic war, the shooting war, but the silent war.
What do you mean by silent war?
Yeah, well, we Americans and our NATO allies, we often track what the enemy does to us. And so when we track significant activities, we track how the enemy is shooting at us, what bombs they're planning. We track significant activities that way. What we're really bad at tracking is what the enemy is doing to the population. So even though we talk about the importance of centric counterinsurgency, the importance of protecting the population, to a large degree, we've got very low visibility on the way in which the Taliban is moving into not just Kandahar City, but also Arghandab District and Panjwai District outside of Kandahar City, the way that they are intimidating local Afghans, local Afghan leaders. And this is what I fear, because the fall of Kandahar, for example, is not going to look like the Taliban rolling down the streets of Kandahar in tanks. Like a steady campaign of fear and intimidation that gradually makes Kandahar inhospitable to the government of Afghanistan. It means moderate mullahs being replaced by radical mullahs. That's what the fall of Kandahar looks like. So I think it's important that the American people understand that we're not losing on the battlefield, so to speak, and it's not as if the Taliban's going to be able to roll tanks through Kabul anytime soon. But where we are losing is in this silent war for the people. And we need to do a better job of protecting the Afghan people, especially those populations that are at risk.
Is there a comparison there, a fair comparison in your view to Vietnam?
I think there's a fair comparison in another way, which is in both in Vietnam and in Afghanistan. One of the weaknesses of prosecuting a counterinsurgency campaign as a third party, that is, on behalf of another government, is that you depend upon that government to do certain things in order for you to be successful. And in Afghanistan, certainly, one of the challenges that we're facing is a very weak Afghan government in some cases, and an Afghan government that in other cases is predatory towards the Afghan people. So we are facing a difficulty in Afghanistan that we not only do we have to defeat the Haqqani Network or the Quetta-Shura Taliban on the field of battle, but in addition to that, we also have to build up Afghan institutions, especially in the security forces, that are going to be strong, capable of defending themselves, and that also aren't going to be predatory towards the Afghan people.
In the Financial Times this morning, U.S. shifts stance on Afghan war. The Obama administration has raised the stakes in Afghanistan by expanding the war to include a full-scale attack on illegal narcotics and has authorized the killing or capture of 50 drug lords, according to a report to be released today. It's from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
Yeah, I'm deeply skeptical of counter-narcotics operations in Afghanistan and their ability to have an effect on the Quetta-Shura Taliban or the Haqqani Network or any of these other insurgent groups. Financing for a group like the Taliban, the support they get from the narcotics trade is almost, I don't want to say it's not important, but they can get other support from inside Pakistan or from financing from the Gulf. And so I'm very skeptical of the way in which cracking down on narcotics is going to lead to victory against the Taliban. Having said that, I think that tracking key power brokers in Afghanistan, not just narcotics traffickers, but keep in mind there are these power brokers in Afghanistan who have ties to the insurgency, who have ties to the government, who have ties to the drug, and who are manipulating the government in Afghanistan and who in many cases are preying upon the Afghan people. The Afghan people want government, but what they're getting is a government that's kowtowing to these power brokers and that's allowing them to expropriate land and take advantage of them. So I think that it's a good thing if we target these power brokers, but I don't mean kill or capture, not necessarily. I mean building up intelligence against these individuals. One of the problems that we have in Afghanistan is that with respect to intelligence, we're very good at gathering intelligence on the enemy, at the shooting at us. We're very bad at gathering intelligence on the local environment, mapping social networks. And these are the types of things that we need to be successful in a counterinsurgency campaign.
What is your background and why are you active in the discussion on Afghanistan?
Sure. I was actually one of the in one of the first conventional units to deploy to Afghanistan, and ended up fighting there in the spring of 2002 in Operation Anaconda in the Shai-Kot Valley campaign. I later went back to Afghanistan in 2004 as part of a special operations unit. After leaving the Army, I went to graduate school at the American University of Beirut and lived in the Middle East for several years, learning Arabic, which is not spoken in Afghanistan. But having said that, just spent a lot of time in the Arabic-speaking world in the Middle East, and developed an interest in counterinsurgency warfare, in large part to try to make sense of what we were doing in 2002, 2003. I was also in Iraq, and 2004. In a lot of ways, I think I became interested in warfare by being a really bad counterinsurgent. On the ground in both Iraq and Afghanistan, we believed that by pursuing the decapitation strategy, especially in Iraq against the former regime leaders, we would be able to end the cycle of violence that had gripped Iraq. While decapitating the leadership is an important part of any counterinsurgency strategy, if you think that just by doing that you're going to have an effect on the dynamics of violence, you're mistaken. So one of the realizations that we came to in both Iraq and Afghanistan is this need to protect the people, to create a space, a secure space for political activity to take place, for economic activities to take place, for institutions to grow. And this is very much true in Afghanistan as much as it was in Iraq in 2007.
Let's take some calls. Andrew Exum is our guest. He is currently with the Center for a New American Security, former soldier in Afghanistan and Iraq. Cal in Riverdale, Georgia. Independent, you're first up.
Yes, good morning. I recently saw an excerpt British platoon in Afghanistan where they were so-called comrades of the Afghan army. The Afghan so-called quote-unquote soldiers were out there smoking pot and no shirts on and just hanging loose. And I'm wondering, how long are we supposed to be there? Because our military is exhausted. We've been fighting almost 10 years with the same soldiers. We don't have any respect for the military, and we need to figure out how to give that country back to their people. If they don't care about their country, I think they do, but they have their own way with their tribal mentality in operating in their country, and I don't see how we're going to sit up there and turn a country around within a year or two. Thank you.
Mr. Exum.
I think the callers put her finger on two key issues. First off is the way in which the U.S. military is exhausted after almost 9 years of continuous fighting. This is something that's very much being felt within the United States military as an institution. The second thing is the need to build up Afghan national security forces, the need to build up both the Afghan National Army and the Afghan National Police. Now, to a large degree, sometimes it's said the Afghan National Army is good, the Afghan National Police is not so good and is predatory. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that Afghan National Army also needs a lot of help. So far, it's fair to say that the Afghan National Army has been a success story for the United States and our NATO allies on the ground in Afghanistan, but they still need a lot of help. We're still bringing units online, especially in the south, trying to man that 205 Corps down in southern Afghanistan, bringing more Afghan Army battalions online. But we also need to partner with these Afghan units. So it's not enough just to roll them off the assembly line. You also have to partner with them at every level to increase the degree building capacity in the Afghan units. Now, with the Afghan National Police, that's been a real headache for us, especially in southern Afghanistan. Not only are the Afghan National Police seen as incompetent, but in cases they're also seen as being predatory towards the Afghan people, shaking them down at checkpoints, committing atrocities against the Afghan people, and we're seen as being complicit in that, right? I mean, we're the ones that gave them uniforms, we're the ones that gave them weapons. So we've got a real headache on our hands with the Afghan National Police. And so not only do we need to increase the numbers of the Afghan National Police and Afghan National Army, to partner with them at every level to ensure that they're not being predatory towards the Afghan people and to ensure that these units continue to improve as the months go on. I think that it is, again, I think the caller put her put her finger right on the button. We are not going to succeed in Afghanistan over the next 12 months. We need a 10-year plan for Afghanistan. That does not mean fighting for 10 years. I think it means fighting for maybe 18 to 24 months, then a transition period while we continue to train these Afghan national security forces, and then after that we move into an overwatch position where. But I think that our aid to the Afghan state is going to continue for the foreseeable future, for decades even.
Next call for Andrew Exum comes from Iowa City, Iowa. Bob, Republican.
Yes, Andrew, great presentation. A lot of intelligence has been spilled out. I have a couple of opinions. I just don't see us ever getting out of Afghanistan, and contrary to Barack Obama saying that we would be pulling out, we're injecting more and more troops in, but I see us there as long as Korea and Germany and some of these other places. It's situation two. What would happen in some of these different tribes, and they all look different, I don't know, but what would happen to some of these young girls? There's been over 200 schools built by the U.S. What would happen to some of these young girls if we pulled out tomorrow?
Yeah, first off, I think that, again, I'm in complete agreement with you. I don't see the United States completely pulling out. I think that a situation lines of our continued involvement in Korea or Germany is much more likely. However, if we get to the point where in 30 years the situation in Afghanistan looks like South Korea, I'm going to be pretty happy. That's an international conference to withdraw American troops that I want to be a part of. But the second issue with respect to the tremendous gains that we've made in education in Afghanistan, Afghanistan has seen an explosion in the number of children that are being educated in school. More people have moved into the schoolhouse in Afghanistan than anywhere else on earth over the past 4 or 5 years, and many of them have indeed been women. We see things when women get educated, entire families get educated. Daughters teach their mothers how to read. Fertility rates go down, so you don't have these women that are caring for massive families with very, very little means of support. And so this is encouraging. On the other hand, our priority in Afghanistan over the next 12 to 18 months is most certainly stabilization. So while development projects such as education, building schools, building hospitals, while these things are important, over the next 12 to 18 months, we really need to focus on what are the drivers of conflict in Afghanistan at the local level. In some places, it may be irrigation. In some places, it may be land disputes. But we need to focus on these individual drivers of conflict, and that's where we need to put our efforts over the near term.
202 is our area code, 737-0001 if you're a Republican and want to talk to Andrew Exum about Afghanistan and U.S. policy. 202-737-0002 for Democrats, and 628-0205 for all others. C-SPAN WJ is the Twitter address. Journal@cspan.org is our email address. Bunny in Southeast Kansas, Democrat, you are on the air.
Good morning, gentlemen. It's really a wonderful day here in Kansas, which, excuse my throat, has been a little touchy lately. Nice to see the day. I hope you're having good weather there, too. The problem with Afghanistan is comparable to the complex problem we've had in Iraq, Iran, all of those areas. I was a teacher under contract in Orange County in California to a Muslim school. And the first 5 minutes, the mom lied to me, and I didn't find it out at that moment. He told me I was going to teach in the new building, and instead they put me behind the administration building in an illegal room with about 32 children in the 2nd, 3rd grade. And about 9 feet from the mosque every Friday morning, I couldn't teach because there was so much noise with the loudspeaker coming out to women who could not go in the mosque on those days. They had to sit outside.
Bunny, can you wrap this up?
I'll try, darling. It's that the Muslim people the men feel that they really respect women, and they don't at all. They don't know the meaning of it. It's a terrible problem.
Andrew Exum, any reaction to
Well, I think
Bunny's
that the world is as diverse as the rest of America. We have millions of Muslims here in the United States who I think have adapted pretty well to our local norms. Norms across the whatever the Muslim world is, across the Arabic-speaking world, across the rest of the Islamic world, they really differ from country to country. And oftentimes, a lot of these traditions that you see are really pre-Islamic tribal traditions that have imposed themselves upon Islam. So I don't think that our problem is Islam, so to speak, but some of these pre-Islamic tribal traditions that we're butting our heads up against.
SoCal tennis guy Daryl Price tweets in, are there still elements of the Pakistani ISI aiding and abetting al-Qaeda elements within Afghanistan?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I can't get into for obvious classification reasons.
Are you working with the administration?
Well, I just got back from 2 months working for General McChrystal, about 5 weeks working for General McChrystal on his initial review that he was charged with writing. I think that I can say that even though we are heartened by the death of Baitullah Masood, who of course is a great threat to both U.S. interests and Pakistani interests, we really need the Pakistanis. In order to be successful in Afghanistan, we have to have some sort of movement against the safe havens for the Haqqani network, for the Quetta-Shura Taliban that are in Pakistan. Certainly in the past, if not the Pakistani government, then elements within the Pakistani military and the Pakistani intelligence services have certainly supported the Haqqani network, the Quetta-Shura Taliban. Elements within Pakistan view these groups, which are a threat not to the Pakistani state but to the Afghan state, as an asset. I think that they see the regime in Afghanistan as being overly friendly towards India, and so they are keeping these groups and sheltering these groups as an asset for Pakistan. It's going to be difficult for us to be successful in any meaningful way in Afghanistan as long as groups like the Haqqani network and the Quetta-Shura Taliban continue to be harbored more or less without interference on the Pakistani side of the border.
In the Washington Post this morning, Joshua Partlow writes, U.S. officials looking at Karzai rival for key new post. American officials have grown increasingly disenchanted with Karzai's leadership over the past 5 years amid rising Taliban violence, rampant corruption, and an ineffective bureaucracy.
Yeah, the Karzai government is certainly cause for concern, and one of the things that we realized in Afghanistan this summer is that governance, the Afghan government's ability to govern, or the degree to which it's corrupt or taking predatory actions towards its own people, this is a win or lose issue. Again, we're not going to fall to the Haqqani network or the Taliban anytime soon. We can defeat them on the field of battle. That's not the issue. But we disheartened to a large degree by the way some of the behavior that the Karzai government has engaged in over the past few years, the corruption, certainly the perceived corruption. Everywhere I go in Afghanistan, and over this past summer, I spoke to Afghans in the west, north, east, south, all over Afghanistan, and each one of them identified government corruption as a real issue. So we've got some issues with the Karzai regime. The difficulty, I think, from a U.S. and allied perspective, is that we have to have a strategy for after the elections. You know, what happens regardless of who wins, and we have to have a political strategy that's in place to protect key provincial governors and key ministers in Kabul who are seen as being effective. If we lose some of those key ministers and provincial governors, then we're in a real tough situation. In other words, if let's say Karzai does win re-election, and he uses some of the deals that he struck in order to get reelected to put cronies or to put key supporters into government ministries that we see as being crucial for our mission success, we've got a real problem. So I think the important thing for both the United States and its allies is to have a political strategy, a unified political strategy for what happens after the election, regardless of whether it's Abdullah who wins or Hamid Karzai.
Election is August 20th. Is there a chance that Hamid Karzai could lose?
I think that Hamid Karzai is most certainly going to win in the first round. Whether or not he wins a high enough percentage of votes for there to be a second round of voting is very much up in the air. And I think when it goes to the second round, it's more or less the election's up for grabs, although Karzai has distinct advantages. Having said that, What I fear more than anything else is not so much whether Karzai wins or Abdullah wins, but already there is a sense in Afghanistan that this election is corrupt, that it's not going to be legitimate. If you gave me $5, I could go on the streets of Kabul and buy you a voter registration card. So you too in the Afghan election, and that is highly disconcerting. And so in this environment, if Karzai were to win with, say, a razor edge percentage of the vote, 50.1% of the vote in either round, we could be facing some serious domestic unrest in Afghanistan. And in addition, obviously enough, if Karzai were to win by some improbable figure, 85, 86%, then I think we'd also be staring down the face of some significant political unrest in Afghanistan. So it's something that I think American policymakers and our NATO allies are concerned with. Again, we need to be the security plan for the elections themselves is pretty solid. I'm worried more about our political plan for after the elections.
Steve in Boston, Independent, thanks for holding. You're on with Andrew Exum.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing well.
I'm calling in reference to the new stance on the anti-narcotics position that we're taking in Afghanistan. I think the implications are going to be far-reached around the world when it comes to the poppy plant, especially in Mexico and the border, where people are going to directly lose their lives because we're taking away something that's long. It just outdates any U.S. involvement in the Middle East, and I think we should just mind our business.
Mr. Exum?
Well, to a certain degree that we need to, a telling example is that when the Taliban conducts operations in southern Afghanistan, they often check with the local villagers to make sure, hey, is this an okay time for us to begin an operation or to begin a major offensive? And the local villagers say, could you wait until after the poppy harvest? And they say, yeah, sure, no problem. We'll wait for 3-4 weeks. The Taliban is very good at this, very good at minding the agricultural realities of southern Afghanistan, the economic realities of their would-be constituents. We're not so good at this. Having said that, just as a caveat to what this caller said, poppy production has risen sky high over the past few years, and that's a change in Afghanistan. So while yes, poppy cultivation has been a constant in Afghanistan, it's been a constant at varying levels, and certainly poppy cultivation over the past 3-4 years has risen to a much higher level than is traditional for Afghanistan.
On our Democrats line, Lloyd from Bronx, New York. Go ahead.
I've paid a lot of attention to what's been going on with the Afghan war and also with what was going on in Iraq. And if you look at China, if you look at Russia, there's not a lot of war waging going on with those two nations. However, when it comes to America, we're always trying to prop up a government, stop a government, take down a regime. And my question is, what would happen, and I kind of know what the answer is, but I want to hear your impression, Andrew. What would happen if America left Afghanistan right now, today? Because, we've got to have some type of end to this. It seems like it's just going on forever. We're always fighting a war, and other nations, China, larger nations, are not doing that. So my question is, if we left today, in terms of the Taliban and other segments, what would be your notion of what would happen afterwards? Thank you.
Yeah, I think Lloyd has expressed a concern that a lot of Americans have, especially after what seemed to be a never-ending war in both Iraq and Afghanistan. I just want to point out that, of course, China and Russia, they do wage wars. China's got serious domestic disturbances in some of their provinces, and Russia, of course, invaded Georgia a few years ago. But with respect to what would happen if we left Afghanistan, I think that's the big unanswered question. And I apologize, Lloyd, I don't have a great answer for you. A lot of the arguments that you hear for, well, let's just pull out of Afghanistan. Honestly, how serious, how important are our interests in Afghanistan? And would the Taliban take over? I don't think the Taliban would take over immediately. I think that we'd be able to use some of our standoff firepower to keep the Taliban in the Quetta Shura Taliban and the Haqqani network from taking over the government in Kabul. I think the key issue, Lloyd, is whether or not Afghanistan becomes a area in which al-Qaeda and other transnational terror groups can plot attacks against the United States, and B, whether we create dysfunction and chaos in Afghanistan that then destabilizes Pakistan and the rest of the region. And that's where we do have some serious interests. So because I can't tell you exactly what's going to happen, because I don't know what the consequences of an American withdrawal are, I'm very wary of articulating or arguing for an immediate withdrawal until we realize what those consequences are. Because I do think we do have interests in both Afghanistan and the greater region that we do well to protect.
Michael Scheuer, the former head of the bin Laden unit for the CIA, was on this program on Sunday talking about Afghanistan. Get your reaction to what he had to say.
The one mission we had after 9/11 was to destroy as much of al-Qaeda and the Taliban as we could. We haven't done that. So I think it's very hard for us to leave now and say, well, we weren't that worried about those fellows anyways. On the other hand, I think we're getting rapidly to the point where Afghanistan is not worth another American life. If you're not going to go there to win, and honestly, sir, if we're talking about winning, we're talking about 300 to 500,000 American troops and a very aggressive, very bloody war. If we're not willing to do that, I tend to think that American parents have the right to demand their children get out of there.
Mr. Exum.
Well, I think that Scheuer's put his finger on something that's very important. On the one hand, we definitely have interest in Afghanistan. We definitely need to go after al-Qaeda and make sure that Afghanistan is not the type of place that is hospitable towards a continued al-Qaeda presence. But on the other hand, those interests, they have limited utility as casus belli. In other words, how long, how many resources we expend in Afghanistan, how much money we spend, how many lives we expend, is very much an open question. It's very difficult to quantify that. It's very difficult to say, how many lives is Afghanistan worth? 1,000 more American deaths, $200 billion more dollars. It's very difficult to quantify that. I'm not sure I agree with Mr. Scheuer on the exact numbers of troop levels, but I do think that, and not with respect to American or allied troop levels, I think that by boosting the size of the Afghan National Security Forces, that we can get kind of this troop-to-task ratio that's a little more favorable. So I'm not sure that we need to so dramatically increase our NATO and ISAF troop levels. We probably do need more troops, at least for the but I think that we definitely need more Afghan National Security Forces. And really that first question he posed is the question. We know Afghanistan is worth something, but we're not sure how much more expenditure of U.S. blood and treasure it's worth.
Laguna Woods, California. Mike, Independent. You're on with Andrew Exum. Please go ahead.
Good morning, gentlemen. I think, like most libertarians, I have the operating assumption that our political class is filled with power-hungry control freaks, and that the press corps are their faithful toadies. I also think that in Afghanistan, a principal factor in the corruption is drug prohibition. We've tried crop substitution, eradication, and interdiction in Colombia, and has failed to work even though we've tried for decades. My question is, what is the administration's response to that? And in other words, how do they think it's going to work in Afghanistan, which failed for decades in Colombia? And have you ever heard any journalist ask the administration that question?
Well, I think that Mike has faithfully represented the libertarian line, and I'm